Okay, well then I will start.
We are live.
Oh, wait, hold on. We just got to go live. I'll do a short introduction and then you can get started.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay, welcome to the Node.js Foundation Technical Steering Committee for October 25th, 2017. We're going to go through our standard agenda, and as part of that, our first thing on the agenda is any announcements. So does anybody have announcements that they wish to share with people?
I could do a quick announcement. We did the security release yesterday, v4, v6, v8. We're all updated due to a security vulnerability, a DOS that was introduced from a zlib update. There was a regression in the 8.8 release that is unrelated, and there's an 8.8.1 release being prepared today. The 8.8 release also came with HTTP 2, not behind a flag, and that's pretty exciting.
Okay, I'm just taking those notes. Release. Okay, right. Okay, so any other announcements? If not, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a working group update. And this week, we've lined up Forrest from the moderation team to give us an update on the team formation there. So, Forrest, take it away.
I have some slides that you may or may not be able to see, depending on who you are. Those slides are linked to from the TSC issue with the other information about the agenda and meeting topics. Don't worry, you're not missing a whole lot if you can't see them. They're mostly just to organize myself. And they were put together in about 15 minutes, so this may be a little ragged.
I did add the link to the minutes as well, so that people want to grab them.
Excellent. Everybody likes numbers, so I thought I'd start with some pretty simple numbers. As of now, there are 10 members of the Node.js moderation team. The most recent member was the fourth eye, added yesterday. We're really appreciative for him joining the group for reasons that I will get to in just a moment. We've had 2 meetings since this team was established, and we've had either 0 or 2 incidents requiring moderation, depending on how you look at it. And the reason I frame it that way is that there have been no incidences that have required us to go in and actively get our hands dirty in a conversation that is taking place on the repos related to the foundation. We've had 1 request for guidance on how to, actually, I guess 2 requests for guidance on how to engage the potentially difficult conversation topic, both of those coming from members within the team. And we've had 1 instance of, I believe, Rich needing to figure out how we can go about moderating or banning a badly behaved bot. But there has been no conversation that has reached a point where it has needed our involvement, and that's awesome. I think that that's kind of going to set the pattern for the team, which is that we really aren't going to have a whole lot to do, which is good because we're actually a pretty small team for reasons that I'll discuss in just a second. And one thing I did want to make clear early on is that this is a team and not a working group. And the reason that I put it that way is that we exist pretty much exclusively to enact policy that has been decided upon by other groups. We do not come up with what needs to be moderated. We are not thought police, and I talk about that a little bit more later on. Our job is to facilitate, a pleasant and constructive engagement on the part of the members of the community and the foundation. And as such, and because a lot of the members of the team are also involved with Node in other ways, in fact, I think almost all of them, except for me, have substantial involvement with either the foundation or the collaboration of working on the project itself. Our time commitment to this is pretty low because we don't come up with our own policy. We really haven't come up with anything in the way of leadership. We don't really need it. We're pretty much consensus driven. And the idea is if there's anything that comes up that needs interpretation beyond our group, that will be passed along to one of the relevant other leadership organizations within the foundation and the community. So the TSC, the ComCom, and the foundation board. And we are basically a resource that is there to provide a timely response when needs warrant for anything that requires moderation. So our most valuable trait as a group is the trust and faith of the community and the board. Our job is to facilitate and not to say what is or isn't valid to be talked about. We should never be doing anything that isn't clearly governed either by the Node.js moderation policy or the code of conduct. Those are kind of our 2 working documents. If it turns out those documents are not sufficient to help in situations that we encounter in the business of doing our duties, then what will need to happen is that whichever groups are responsible for the relevant policies are going to need to make alterations to those policies to handle what it happens. Like, we enact the policy, we don't make it. This is something that I and a couple other people proposed when we had our first meeting, and there's kind of a broad consensus within the group that that's how we should operate. Because there are people who are involved so deeply within the rest of the organization, that means there needs to be some sort of way for people to tap out of discussions that allow that they're involved in. We saw some of this in the kerfuffle that happened in late August, where there are people who had very strongly held points of view who were also trying to kind of guide and moderate the discussion while they were having it. And that doesn't work super great for a whole bunch of reasons. So one of the things that we'd like to get established, and this is something that's actually on my plate, is to come up with a formal policy for recusal. So you can just say, I'm not going to be involved in this discussion because I'm too directly involved in it one way or the other. And then somebody else from the moderation team will have to step in and take over any moderation duties that are required. It shouldn't be more than a paragraph or two, but the idea is to have there be a formal channel for somebody to say, I'm not somebody who is I'm not somebody who's good to be involved in this discussion, and also to have for people to say, you should recuse yourself from this discussion because you are obviously participating in it as somebody who has a stake or a position that they need to establish. And we do have members of the team on all three of the board, the ComCom, and the TSC, which is super helpful because that makes it easier for us to float up whatever policies, suggestions, or requests we might have to the relevant teams to have them deal with them. I have a little typo in there. Just ignore that I've covered in there twice in the headline. With the fourth eye joining us, we now have global time zone coverage. One of the things that's a little bit of a struggle for us is that we are a pretty small team, and for us to be able to do some of the things that we'd like to be able to do, most notably to be able to handle all moderation duties across the broader organization, and maybe even branching out to handling IRC and hopefully very narrowly tailored social media channels. Like, I don't think it makes sense for us, or is even really possible for us, to try and have any kind of global hegemony on all discussions of anything having to do with Node anywhere. But we have had some discussions about taking over the IRC channel moderation duties. But to do that, we need to have people who are available in a timely manner whenever this happens. So we have a small team. We're not evenly distributed. A bunch of us are in Europe, a bunch of us are on the West Coast, and now we have one person in India. We need to kind of spread that out and maybe do a little recruiting to try and get more even coverage. And I think also we're looking at the idea of having there be an on-call rotation. Something that I forgot to put on the slide and should have is that we do have a Slack workspace that we use for coordinating things and for kind of trying to hash out any issues that come up in moderation. Mostly it's just been talking about how we organize ourselves thus far. Our goals as a team is to iron out the moderation policy, because now that we're actually trying to put it into practice, we are running into things where it's just it's not really clear what we need to do in all cases. A really good example of this is that it's not really clear how the moderation repo, which is private to collaborators within the organization, should most effectively be used. It's been kind of used as kind of I'll just say a dumping ground for hot potato issues around moderation and code of conduct violations. And that made it unuseful as a tool for the team to track what they needed to be doing. So about a week ago, on a Friday, I went through and closed everything out, and that wasn't immediately actionable by our team. And as a result, I had reasons for doing that on a Friday evening, and I'm happy to discuss those with people kind of outside the bounds of this meeting. I ended up inadvertently creating a bunch of work for people as some stuff was kind of churned that hadn't been fully resolved. And for that, I apologize. In the future, at the request of at least one TSC member, I will not be doing that on a Friday, or the team will not be doing that on a Friday. So we will make sure that we come up with some sort of cadence for keeping that up to date, but we need to figure out what the policy is around that. Also, we need to figure out how we're going to do what we do and hopefully figure that out before things get too hot and heavy. Right now, it looks like the only way for us to be able to moderate comments on all of the repos across the entire organization is for us to be made org owners. That's the concept that GitHub has for this kind of thing. That's a pretty heavy hammer. There's an expectation that all of us are holding ourselves and are being held to a higher degree of accountability than average collaborators, because we do have these special powers to go in and directly interfere with business being done within the organization. But I think a number of us are still pretty uncomfortable with the idea of needing to be org owners to do this. So we've talked about using, just for example, William Kapke's bot that would allow it to have those powers, and then we would have certain powers delegated to us, and that could all be audited and controlled. We haven't figured that out yet. And like I said earlier, we want to work towards being able to handle all moderation across the organization, and there's policy reasons for that, and that's definitely something that would need to be codified in the moderation policy itself. And the idea is just that like having watched how some of the moderatable and things that have happened in the past have gone down, there's been issues with people trying to self-moderate or moderate the discussion where it gets into awkward spaces, whether it's people being concerned about being tone policed, or whether it's like it turns into an argument about what constitutes a violation of the code of conduct, or or people just saying, I'm not going to moderate myself, this is important. It needs to be something where there can be no question that this is what needed to happen, and that there's an audit log, that all these things are handled by a uniform set of policies. So eventually we'd like to have the organization the team be in a place where we can take over all those moderation duties. And again, I want to stress, our job is not to say what is or is not permissible within the bounds of the organization. It's just to say we do have these policies, we all agreed to them by being part of this organization. This conversation has gone outside the bounds of these rules we've all agreed to run by, so we're going to moderate them. And having people who are trained to do that, which Tracy has been looking at getting from the foundation, the budget to actually get us trained in moderation and facilitation. Having a group of people who are experts in this should be doable, assuming that we have the resources necessary to handle this. And also, like I have said, our goal is to have as little to do as possible, right? That's another part of the reason why I like to think of this as being a team rather than a working group. I don't want to see us building out a bunch of stuff. We shouldn't need any of this stuff. We should only build out as many tools as we need to actually do our jobs, and we shouldn't have to do that job very frequently. So that's all I got. I've got links at the end here to the moderation policy. A little bit of confusion came up recently over where that lives, because it now exists in two places, under both the Node.js TSC repo and under the Node.js admin repo. And I think one of our short-term goals is to just basically remove the copy that's in the TSC, because the living document and the one against all policy changes should be made ideally in the form of pull requests. I like the idea of having concrete things to discuss rather than having these issue discussions that can be pretty meandering and take a long time to reach resolution, because it's not really clear where people are looking for actionable feedback. But that should happen against the admin repo. And the other two links are to the minutes from our first two meetings. Any questions?
One question, I guess, are those minutes going to get landed in the repo somewhere?
That is one of our TBDs. I'd have to look at my list of notes to figure out where the minutes themselves to figure out where we landed on that. The idea is that since we may have discussions, much like the TSC does, there may be discussions within those minutes that are sensitive and shouldn't be carried outside the bounds of the group. They'll have to be laundered in some way before they're put in public records. And I think one of the things that we may have decided in the previous meeting, and again, I'd have to review the minutes to be clear, was that we will have, if you look at the moderation policy, there are regular work products that come from the team, which is we need to have a record of moderation team activity for every month that is in a publicly accessible place. And concentrate on those products rather than actually just sharing our meeting minutes, because meeting minutes may or may not be of value relative to the things that we're actually obligated to produce as a byproduct of the operation of the team.
Sure. Okay, I was just asking because most work groups end up putting them somewhere where people can take a look. The other thing I wanted to ask is, with the scope clearly set as enforcing as opposed to defining policy, does the moderation team think that there needs to be something done on the defining front, or we have a set of policies and we're in a good state? Because I think that's something that the TSC was thinking the moderation team might have done, and if it's not in the scope, we may have to form some other group to look at that.
So we do have we do all kind of agree that we should be able to suggest things. Like we just can't unilaterally decide on things. So examples are the recusal policy. That's something that I'd actually like to see in the moderation policy itself. So it's incumbent upon me to suggest that as a pull request. Like that's one example. And there are other areas where like we're going to want to have more clarity around some things. Like some of this is also us being as lazy in the computer science sense as possible about defining this policy. Like we really haven't had an opportunity to test this stuff under fire yet, which is great. But like we basically kind of all agreed that it would be best to iterate on the policy as necessary in response to events. And that may make us slow to respond in some cases for stuff early on, but like I think it's better to do that than to try and like game everything out and end up with something that's either like cumbersome or a source of disagreement in and of itself, right? Like I think that, like, this is just me speaking personally, but I think that some of the confusion and difficulty in August could have been avoided if there had been a little more recognition of the fact that, like, you know, if you don't actually agree with the rules that are established for things like the code of conduct, like those things aren't beyond reach, right? Like those need to be living documents. They need to actually reflect the consensus of the will of the group. And instead of like having kind of second order arguments over like what that should be, like we should actually make like formal requests on that stuff. And that can come from everywhere, not just the group. So like, yes and no to answer your kind of question under the question there, which is like, does there need to be another organization that's in charge of that stuff? I think we will identify things that need to be refined. And I think that stuff can come from the moderation team, but I think it can also come from other groups within the organization. So the TSC and the ComCom are both going to have feels about this stuff. And if things get super hectic, it may even come to the point where the board has opinions about these things. And all four of those groups should be in a position to make changes to the policy.
Right.
But, like, we don't dispose, right? Like we only suggest.
Right. So I think to interpret your answer is, it sounds like you don't think there's anything that, you know, the TSC has to run off and do. You guys will make suggestions if you come across them, like it, and it makes total sense what you said to base that on experience that you get while implementing what we have today. So the TSC as a group doesn't necessarily need to action anything, and we'll see suggestions over time that, you know, we'll need to weigh in on. Is that?
Yeah. And like I said, we have representation from all three of the most significant governing bodies within the community and the foundation, right? So if we need to send something to you, we can make it Rich's job to bring that to the group. And like we almost did that with the update, but he's like, can somebody who's been more involved do it? Because, you know, he's got other things to do. So here I am. But yeah, I think that having those lines of like a question that we do have is trying to figure out how to efficiently escalate stuff to the TSC and the ComCom. And I think that is something that we're still working out.
Right.
So one thing that I thought would be worth bringing up, just to chew on, not necessarily asking for anything right now, but one of the bits in moderation that we've discussed has been missing as of late was primarily a proper process when dealing with moderation requests against leadership, specifically the technical steering committee, the community committee, and potentially even the board of directors themselves. There's very, very interesting conflicts there, especially if the leaders are proposing like the actual like process for that. There's the issue that I opened where I had some very loose language around it and we had a conversation in there. This is an example of something that I would be interested in hearing a process that the moderation team would be interested in following, and I'd be interested I'd even be willing as a TSC member to pair on it. But this is one of those areas where I think for the most part, Michael is maybe speaking to, and he was saying we were hoping that the moderation team may be able to make some suggestions, and it's potentially around the conflict in us developing that process.
So that's I was kind of getting to that elliptically a little bit earlier, which is like we ultimately as a community have to have rules that we're all willing to be bound by. And if those rules are explicit and objective enough, then again, the moderation team's job is just to enforce a policy, and it doesn't matter who that's being enacted against, right? Like it doesn't matter whether it's somebody who's on the board or somebody who's on the TSC or somebody who runs a working group or whatever. Like that it's purely a mechanical process of looking at a policy and saying, is this outside of the bounds of that policy? If so, then we're going to moderate this comment, and we're going to tell somebody, hey, you've been moderated, or hey, you've been temporarily banned, or hey, you've been perma-banned, right? Like it's like we gotta, like, those rules have to be strong enough to withstand that pressure, and that's not something that we as a group of people like are in a position to do just on our own, like from our own judgment. And I don't think that's a position we should even like want to be in.
Yeah, I think part of the hard thing to balance there, and I'm still trying to figure it out myself, is like, if the moderation team is the team who's going to have to follow through and act on the process, I think it's important that their stakeholders and at least, you know, agreeing to what they'd be willing to do. At the same time, though, like, I think it's extremely important that, and I don't think the intention was ever to say that the moderation team was deciding the process.
Yeah, well, I'm just kidding. Like I may have opinions about all kinds of things that happen around Node, and involving governance and people making claims about various things. But like in my role as a moderation team member, like I am an umpire, right? Like I'm calling balls and strikes, and it is imperative, I think, that we maintain that trust and faith of the community. And that means that really it has to be the rules themselves that are shouldering the load of like whatever social pressure comes to bear. Like if somebody has to make like a tough call, like that call has to ultimately be handled by the policy we have. Like do you get what I'm saying here? Do you see why I'm emphasizing this so hard?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think at this point we should probably continue that discussion offline, because we're probably running out of time in terms of what we can afford in our agenda today. But maybe Miles and Forrest and whoever else, Miles, you think should be involved, whether that's future discussion in the greater TSC or some subgroup, if you can facilitate that, that would be great.
Yeah, I can take it back to the issue that I opened around this. I think maybe even just another public session with an open invite to collaborators could be an interesting way to do it.
Yep, sounds good. And thank you, Forrest, for a very, very good update. That was, I think, very good and effective.
All right.
Okay, so let's move on to the rest of our agenda. The next thing we had on the agenda, we talked about this week of moving them closer to the beginning, was the issue number 383, the proposal to form a governance working group. So let's handle that one next, unless there's any objections.
I don't think that there's much to dive into. I think James has an action item on there that he can update us on. But aside from that, I don't know how much discussion there is to have.
Yep, action item is, I'm just working on setting up a call. I'm going to be updating the doodle with a few more dates and times to see if we can get more people to respond. We only had, I think, 6 TSC members respond to that, which was rather disappointing. I want to see if we can get a few more and then go from there.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like, I know I'm one of the ones who didn't respond, but somehow it wasn't on my radar anyway.
There are a number of non-TSC members who responded, which is fantastic. Love to see that, but we need more buy-in from actual TSC members.
Okay, so next action is just you're going to send out a new doodle. I might suggest if you actually send that as to the TSC mailing list, that, I don't know, just another suggestion of how to get it on people's radars.
Yep.
Okay, so any other discussion on that one, or is that cover it for today's agenda?
We just need, if anybody has any concerns or issues about that.
No, okay, let's move on. So the next issue, just going back to I guess I'll ask, were there any other ones that people thought we should prioritize? Nope. Okay, so let's go back to the regular list. Support for both OpenSSL 1.10 and 1.02. Opening that one up. I know we had a bit of a discussion on that last week. So we're bringing it around. I mean, I see there's been lots of discussion this week with Rod chiming in to help review. It looks like we're on a path to getting something where, at least we'll have the option to compile with either or and do some testing, which is good. Is there any, I think, Miles, you'd added it to the agenda. Are there any other specific things we need to discuss on this one?
I can add a couple of things here.
Sure.
And say that it's the current state of it. It's looking like it's getting ready to land. So if anyone has any concerns about it, then you should drop in now. This is not to switch to 1.1.0. It is just to provide the option to compile against it. And this is going to be an important step because remember that we run out of OpenSSL 1.02 support with Node 8. So Node 10 needs to have something else. We don't know what the next LTS for OpenSSL is because it's not been released yet. It's not going to be 1.10, maybe 1.11. But this is the first step in getting there. And we just need to do some stuff on the build side to ensure that we can test 1.10 and beyond. But right now, this change still works against 1.02. So I suspect it'll land sometime soon.
So I had, after the last meeting, created a doodle and sent it out to try to create a meeting for this week. And Michael Dawson and I were the only ones who filled it out. To be honest, especially if I'm going to be taking on a larger role with our module stuff, I don't know that I have the bandwidth to drive this one. Rod, because you have the additional context and like knowledge in OpenSSL, would you be willing to be a champion for this?
Look, to be honest, I could do, but I don't know what there is to discuss. What is it just a matter of having information available? Because I'm not sure there's decisions that can be made yet because of this problem of there's only one LTS version of OpenSSL right now, and that's 1.02. There's no other options. So this is really a matter of preparing ourselves for Node 10, and we just don't know between now and then what's going to be LTS.
So in context, what I think would make sense would be getting a group of people in who know about OpenSSL to discuss it, examining other potential SSL options, and then also trying to get in touch with the OpenSSL team themselves to find out if there's information that's not public, or if there's stuff that's being discussed that could maybe help us make an informed decision.
Yeah, that was one of my suggestions.
You essentially want like an OpenSSL interest group that can surface and drive. Okay. So where was that? Where did you drop that doodle in? Was that? I didn't see that.
I think to be honest, the doodle can be safely ignored at this point on Wednesday. I don't think the meeting's going to happen this week, and it was more just like I'm realizing that I'm stretching myself too thin and I can't drive this one. So if you're able to pick it up, I'd really appreciate that.
Okay, I'll see if I can corral people who are interested in this stuff. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
how
I think the best outcome because of the uncertainty now is at least to sort of put together a plan that says, here are the problems, here are the things, and concretely say that if, for example, if there's nothing from OpenSSL by a certain deadline, like what are we going to do, right?
Yeah, it's probably what maybe the way to do it. Maybe what I should do is actually just draft a document that outlines the current state of play, and it may be even proposals for our position, and then get a group to review and agree on that. Because it seems to me that our biggest problem here is there's so few people that are interested in this context and know enough about it. And we keep on having these discussions. It's a little bit like ES modules, but a little bit less controversial at the moment. Where these things come up like, oh, you guys should support LibreSSL. And then what's the answer to that? There's only a few people that really can give answers to that. So having that kind of information in some documented form, at least for the TSC, might be helpful. I'm not sure how much more we can do at this point other than just document.
I think we should at least go back to OpenSSL in some form on their mailing list, or some of us have some contacts, and say, you know, we're in a tough position here. We have this 3-year support cycle for 10. Based on what you've shared publicly, you know, we don't know what to do, right? Like 1.02.
They're notoriously and famously short on developers.
Right.
Yeah, but they're quite well funded these days, though. They do have a paid team, paid staff. So, like I've got a couple of contacts I can probably use there, and I think the guy that this Daniel guy, who's I think from Google, is connected in there as well. So
yeah, just to at least have them weigh in on like, hey, we don't know what to do because 102 is longer lifespan than 1.1, but we know it's going to be dead before we can't use it in 1. So I think getting their feedback makes a lot of sense.
I think one of the things worth considering here too, and I'm not saying that we need to do a nuclear option, but from LTS, we did have problems with getting OpenSSL to land patches on older versions, even patches that were reviewed. It was just a really laborious process and did not have a lot of response. So if we don't have a clear LTS release from OpenSSL, and we're going to have to start floating patches or working with them on floating patches, the benefit of using OpenSSL over a number of alternatives is not that high. So I think it would also be very worthwhile to examine what the other major SSL libraries are, what SSL libraries are being embedded in other runtimes that have LTS support, and just kind of get an idea of what our options are. It may even make sense to reach out to Debian or some of the Deb maintainers, because if they're in a way maintaining their own LTS, potentially we could look at downstreaming that instead of the official release.
Yeah, that's been on my plate for a while, is to connect with at least the Red Hat folks, because they've got the longest support lifecycle, and it goes way beyond OpenSSL. Yeah, that's
with everything though, not just OpenSSL.
That's right, but this one's particularly key because it's so much relies on it, and it's so ripe for real security vulnerabilities. Anyway, look, I'll take this as an action item, and I'll report back if I've got a strategy.
Sounds good. And when you start to put together that group, I'm interested. So just
okay, and just look again, go back to that issue if you want to review it. I suspect it'll land soon because it's pretty good code, and it doesn't really impact Node very much. I doubt there's any reason to pull it back onto Node 8, but it'll probably go into Node 9, and I don't even think it's a Semver minor. Oh, there is actually a bunch of deprecations that'll have to go in there that'll impact Node 9 and then 10. So we have to change a few API things.
How long do we have? 9's going out on Tuesday of next week, so we don't really have a lot of time to get some remaining.
There's no breaking changes in here, so I don't think it needs to go in 9.0.0.
Okay.
So it's Semver minor at the largest, and maybe not even that. So
can you just double check and drop me a confirmation in the 9.0 proposal thread that there are no breaking changes in that?
Yep, sure.
I think I'd say at this point it'd be better to let it soak a bit in master first anyway.
Sure. The change set is actually quite small. It's really just to support compiling against 1.10, leaving our 1.0.2 alone. So it's not as bad. It's not as severe as it sounds on the surface.
I was thinking we could probably take this off the agenda if everybody agrees, like the TSC agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, I've done that.
Michael, what may be helpful, and we should talk about this offline, is rather than being on the agenda as a discussion point, I think it would make sense to have rolling items on the agenda that are important for the TSC to remember, so it doesn't get lost. This and modules are two examples of ones that I think are important to remain on the agenda as like a floating item, but not necessarily something we have to talk about.
I would imagine a review would be useful for that.
Yeah, I agree. Something like but yes, another tag would be good. I agree that having a sort of I think that fits in with the initiatives. Here are the things that are initiatives, and therefore, like each meeting, we can just review if there's something to talk about.
Yep.
Okay, so let's take that offline and figure out what to do.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, let's move on to the next, which is issue 1684. Util assert expose util deep strict equal. Does anybody remember who added that one?
I don't know who added it, but I don't think it needs to be on there anymore. I think I probably put it on there because Ruben was had a blocking objection, but he's since removed it. So just basically looked like it was heading for a vote on and the vote was going to be on what to name the method. Everybody wants the method exposed. Just some people want it to be called util.equal. Some people want it to be util.is equal, util.is deep equal, util.is deep strict equal. It looks like we now have consensus that util.is deep strict equal will be the name, at least initially, and that can probably land if CI is green. I think I had to rerun CI because it had been like 2 weeks or something. So
Okay.
I think we can move on unless somebody else has something else to add to this, and I'll go ahead and remove the TSC agenda label from it right now.
I just did.
Okay, super. Oh,
Okay.
sorry, no, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Unless I haven't heard anybody else speak up, so let's move on to the next one, which is 15.346.
Also
Runtime.
mine? Yeah, that's also mine. It's the buffer constructor. So I had taken the action item of determining the sense of the TSC because there was some indication at Node Interactive that maybe the sense was that we shouldn't plan to deprecate the buffer constructor, to runtime deprecate the buffer constructor at any point. Turns out that is not the case. The sentiment, as best I could tell from the SurveyMonkey results of 14 TSC members, is that there is a desire to runtime deprecate the buffer constructor at some point in the future. There had been 2 questions that were raised. One was whether or not, we wanted to ever do it, or, were we just like wasting everybody's time from the perspective of the people who wanted it? The answer there apparently is now no. And now then there's a second question, which is, okay, what are the criteria by which the buffer constructor will get a runtime deprecation? And my personal opinion is that the answer to that is probably we can't say at this time, and we'll check again in 6 months, and we'll know it when we see it, kind of thing. I don't think anybody wants to put a stake in the sand and say, when ecosystem usage decreases to X percentage, or when 10.0 is out and Canary in the Gold Mine doesn't show any failures, then that's good enough, or anything like that. So I asked if there was a TSC member who would be willing to take on the task of trying to articulate something more specific than that, and nobody has stepped up yet, and I don't expect anybody to step up. So I think that is the end of the conversation, unless somebody finds that unacceptable. So anybody?
It all seems reasonable to me. I can take it off the TSC agenda unless anybody wants to object. Okay, no, let's move on to the next issue then. Stream, move prefix files into internal streams. This is 11957. Just checking if we can see anybody on the call, the one who added this.
Matteo added this. He's off right now. I believe it's just on his to-do when he's got the time to do it.
Let's just leave it on and move on to the next item. Is that the best move?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if there's really anything else to discuss with it on the agenda. It's just waiting for him to be able to have the time to do it.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know what we would really discuss there.
Okay, so basically it's remove it from the agenda at this point, and it can be re-added if needed.
Yep.
Okay, done. Okay, the next issue we already talked about 383. So the next one is who should be in Node.js security, who should have access to the private repo. This is 358. I'm just reopening this one to see where the discussion is on that guy. Sorry.
That's probably a whole separate meeting, to be honest.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of discussion going on, in the security working group repo. There's a bunch of discussion, I think, that's going on that front. Yeah, I don't know if it needs to be on the agenda specifically, or whether it's just that we need to continue the discussion in GitHub at this point.
I, for one, would like to propose that we let the security working group come up with a fully formed and thought through proposal that they can pitch to the TSC. Perhaps they want to ping us for information in between and make sure that they're on the right path. But I'd like to empower that working group to help design a process. Also, I'm also really interested in the early access to information, but that's a tangential topic. But I don't think that we should really be examining that or digging into that until we have a proposal in front of our faces from the security working group.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. As of course, everybody in the TSC is free to participate in that discussion, but I think having that group come up with the proposal makes a lot of sense to me. Any objections to that approach? Okay, I think given no objections, we'll take it off the agenda, and it can be brought back on once it's in the right state, or if somebody has concerns that it is stalling out or anything like that. Okay, the next issue is number 12 in the admin repo. Now, this has actually been on our agenda for quite a while. It's documenting the expectations for the TSC and ComCom members. We're actually at a point, at least as of earlier today, where there was no objections and a good number of approvals. So it's looking like it would land by the end of this week. ComCom is actually also going to have it on agenda just to see if anybody, make sure nobody has any final objections. So really the only reason I think at this point is, awareness. If somebody does have objections, please jump into that thread and comment, ASAP. Any comments, discussion that people want to have on that issue?
Sure. So I'd still like to reinforce that, maybe while we might not be able to get broader community values in a timely manner, we could get values the TSC holds for these things, and at least those values, at least there'd be something there to prop up.
Yeah, I think my suggestion on that front would be to open a PR suggesting something that we could get talking about. As my personal feeling is, it still doesn't make sense to block this on that.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that I think, and maybe this is another thing that we could make a top level initiative, but the values that we were talking about were core values to the project that would live in the admin group. And the plan that was discussed was that we wanted to do a number of these different outreaches to try to get community involvement from various communities. And for the record, I'll be running one of these in South America and Asia over the next month. I am really hesitant for us to start landing copy before we've had a chance to have stakeholders from other markets engage and participate in the process. Otherwise, it's possible that we would create an anchor at which the discussion would be coming from. I also personally don't think that we need to block this expectation document on those values. I think that something that's slightly vague in this particular case is better than nothing. But that's just my personal take on it, and I'm open to be convinced of otherwise.
And I did go back and review the current document. I reference to the concept of a values document has been removed and made more generic in there as well, which I thought was more acceptable to decouple it, as Michael had mentioned.
I think I'd probably be okay with that then.
So does it make sense for us to now open the floor to questions?
Did we talk about the ESM issue, or did we just move that to a different meeting? I didn't really catch that. It was very quick. Issue 16170. Okay, I guess we just punted that. I don't really know, but okay.
1617. Oh, the MJS stuff. Yeah,
Sorry,
you're right. We did punt on it. I think that the consensus on it was that we're going to hold a sub meeting specifically focused on modules.
Yeah, I was talking to the mute, but we did have we did have an original meeting yesterday, and we spent the whole hour. We agreed we needed to continue that with a group of people from the TSC who were interested. So I think, Miles, you're going to set up a follow-on meeting, right? So instead of discussing it in the small amount of time we'd have in the regular meetings, we're going to continue to have a set of dedicated meetings for that.
Yeah, I think a doodle already went out for another meeting tomorrow. I think the plan right now is that as a group, we're going through a high-level agenda so that privately to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then once we've got that, we're going to open the conversation as a publicly broadcast meeting. But we just want to make sure. Pardon? Was that?
I don't think that was anything.
No, sounds like a dog or something. Someone really did not like what I just said. But I think the idea was that right now we're just doing it in a private session because it is such a sensitive topic, to make sure that we can have an open discussion about it to find a alignment. And then once we have that, we are going to continue discussion, but in a more open manner. Does anyone remember who sent around the doodle for a meeting tomorrow? James, was that you?
Nope, that was not me.
No, it was me. You're talking about modules?
Yes.
Yeah, I did that.
Do we have a potential time yet? Are you able to send out an email end of day today on that?
I'll send an email right now while I listen to you talk about this stuff.
All right, cool. I don't think that there's much to talk about at the moment as far as public is concerned, aside from the fact that the TSC is actively working on creating a clear message as to which decisions we've made that we are not planning on revisiting and which decisions are still flexible. And then coming up with a clear communication around that and an ongoing active discussion that will be open to the public and other people will be able to engage in.
Okay, so we've just got a few minutes left, so let's move on to the question and answer. Are there any questions on the IRC or YouTube channel?
I think we should probably address Ben's comment from, or Brian's comment, sorry, I always think it's Ben because of his username. Brian's comment from IRC about the security working group.
So I responded to an IRC.
Go on.
I responded to an IRC just saying that we have a number of uncharted interest groups that are working on similar problems right now. This includes the governance working group. So I don't think that it's a conflict to task the group to act as, an early stage proposal mechanism, especially when there's TSC members involved in the conversation.
Right. I think the only thing them being uncharted means is that they can't independently make as many decisions.
Yeah. And I don't think that the ask was for them to implement the decision as much as to come up with a proposal for the TSC to review.
Right. I mean, I think it may make at some point it may still make sense to charter that group. There's a whole bunch of things being worked on, but I don't see it as a blocker to the work, any of the work that's currently taking place. I guess maybe something we can see is, ask the team that team to think about when it maybe makes sense to request an official charter. And I'll try and do that. Any other questions? No other questions on IRC or the YouTube channel?
So I'm not 100% sure, or I don't 100% remember what this related to, but there was some ingredients on the YouTube chat for an open session for moderation as discussed, which again, I'm not 100% sure what the full context of that was, but
Is there is there a specific question or what's?
It's not a question, it's just like comments.
The intention was that there's some floating moderation work that needs to be done. This may be a governance problem. It may be a day-to-day problem. And I was just suggesting that we get together a group of stakeholders from the ComCom, the TSC, and the moderation team to work through and discover, like what are the edge cases in our process right now, and what are the things that we need to work on, and who are the appropriate people to work on them.
Okay, and is that, so that's something you're going to do?
I've already opened an issue about it. We can bring it back to the tracker.
Okay.
Can you drop a link to the issue in the chat or just mention it?
So it's in the admin repo, and it is number 24.
Okay, yeah, I'll drop them to the YouTube chat. Journey says exactly what Miles said, so.
Okay, and I've added that to the minutes. Any other questions?
Is anyone in IRC? I'm not in IRC right now, so I can't see them. There's nothing else.
Nothing in the IRC right now.
Okay, well then let's call it for today's meeting. Thank you for everybody attending, and we'll talk to you next time.
Right, thanks.